All right. So chapter 4 talked about transformational and charismatic leadership. So transformational and charismatic leadership began in the late 1970s. The transformational approach emerged as a new perspective for understanding and explaining leadership. So it was a way of explaining leadership that no one had seen yet thus far. When it came to the subject of, talking more about leadership and explaining different leadership types and roles. So the transformational approach contrasts traditional leadership labeled as transactional with a more complex and potent type of leadership known as transformational. So like I just said earlier, this was a more in-depth, a newer approach. They brought a new perspective for understanding and explaining different types of leadership roles. The motivational appeals of the transactional leader are designed to satisfy basic human needs. The appeals of the transformational leader go beyond those basic needs to satisfy a follower's higher level needs. So just going through on this chapter, it was noted, they talked about a couple different leaders that had this type of leadership type. And those people were Martin Luther King Jr., Fidel Castro, and Richard Nixon. So Martin Luther King Jr. would fall in more of the charismatic type of leader. So people can act on the environment to achieve their goals, look towards the future, and present a vision that will lead to positive outcomes and address social needs. So that's the kind of leader that Martin Luther King Jr. was. So Fidel Castro is more like an ideological leader. So situational forces are keeping followers from reaching their goals, and purpose changes that will eliminate those blockages. They look to the past and believe it is much better than the present. So he's more of like a stay in the past type guy. And then pragmatic leadership. And this all follows like the SIP model, like we learned in this chapter towards the end. So this focuses on the causes that pose threats and opportunities in the current context. So they look in the present using a vast multitude of skills to deal with complex problems rather than offering inspirational visions or images of the ideal past. A couple more things. So for transformational leaders, they're super creative, they're interactive, they're visionary, they're optimistic, they're empowering, they're passionate. And, furthermore, like since transformational leadership can convert followers into leaders in their own right, these 5 primary characteristics are often filtered throughout transformed groups and organizations. So continuing off that, transformational leaders are innovative and foresighted, like kind of we touched on in that previous point I just made, and they constantly challenge the status quo by seeking out new ideas, products, and ways of performing different tasks. So then we move into more of like the charismatic leaders. So the charismatic leaders are the superstars of leadership. So like I gave the example of Martin Luther King Jr. as a charismatic leader. I mean, we can all tell he was a very charismatic person, and that a lot of people loved and followed him, and he was like a superstar of leadership. So we usually reserve the label charismatic for well-known political, social, and business leaders who have had a significant impact on the lives of others. We all know that Martin Luther King Jr. had a very significant impact on the lives of millions of Americans and people throughout the world, just through the amazing work that he did in the 1960s. So according to Webster's sociological approach to charisma, they include 5 key components. So a leader with extraordinary talents, an unstable or crisis situation, a radical vision for providing a solution to the crisis, a group of followers who believe the extraordinary leader links them to the powers that exceed usual limits, and the validation of extraordinary leaders' talents and power through repeated success. So by describing charisma as a set of behaviors, the behavioral approach attempts to clarify what charisma is and to predict the effects of charismatic leadership. The attribution approach defines charisma by perception of followers. Moving forward, the communication approach suggests that charisma is a specific form of communication, and charismatic leaders excel in 4 core functions of communication, which would be relationship building, impression management, visioning, and influencing. And if we look back at Martin Luther King Jr., he had all 4 of those characteristics 100%. And yeah, so that kind of touches on chapter 4. It was fairly interesting, being able to talk about, more in depth on leadership. Like I said, I've never had the opportunity to learn so much about leadership and how there's different cons and how there's different models that we follow and opinions and fact-based facts and research just on solely leadership. It's very interesting, and another person that would be considered a charismatic leader would be JFK. Just wanted to add that on there. I'm just looking through my notes. So he was creative, interactive, visionary, empowering, and passionate on all of the stuff that he did. So yeah, that's all I have.